Hi Gators! Today we're going to jump into lesson 12.5 to continue our geometry chapter. Now in our last two lessons we learned about a special kind of plane shape called a polygon. And we learned that we can use the sides of polygons to help us name and describe those shapes. Today we're going to focus in on just one type of polygon called quadrilaterals. To review, quadrilaterals are named by their sides and by their angles. They have 4 sides and 4 angles, and these are some different examples. Now, as you can see, there are different types of quadrilaterals. This shape does not look the same as this shape, and this shape does not look the same as this shape. So we do have some special names to call quadrilaterals based on what attributes or descriptions they share. So let's start with some words that you're going to be a little bit more familiar with. One example of a quadrilateral is a rectangle. And a rectangle is defined by having 2 pairs of parallel lines. So what that means is that if I examine the sides of my rectangle, I have one set here of parallel lines, or one pair, like a pair of shoes, and I have another pair of parallel lines running perpendicular to those. All right? They also have 2 pairs of sides that are equal. Now that doesn't mean that every side is equal. What they're saying is that if this side is 8 centimeters, then this side would also be 8 centimeters. And if this side were 4 centimeters, then this side would be 4 centimeters. So for a shape, for a quadrilateral to be a rectangle, it has to have a matching side that is parallel. All right? Finally, they have 4 right angles. They meet at these nice L-shaped corners called right angles. Now let's look at this shape over here. While it looks a little bit different, it looks a little smaller, it's still a rectangle. It still has 1, 2 sets of parallel lines, or 2 pairs of parallel lines. It has side lengths that are the same and that match. And it has 4 right angles. But a lot of times we might call this shape something different. We might call it a square. Now a square is just a special kind of rectangle. A square is special because it has 2 pairs of parallel sides, but all 4 of those sides are of equal length. So instead of just having a matching side opposite to it, it has matching sides all the way around. And it still has those 4 right angles. So if somebody asked you, what's the difference between a rectangle and a square? You could tell them, a square is a type of rectangle that has 4 equal sides instead of 2 pairs of equal sides. All right? Now we're ready to jump into some terms that we maybe aren't as familiar with. First, let's take a look at a shape, a quadrilateral, called a rhombus. Now, these are some examples of a rhombus, and you might say that they look a little bit different than you might compare squares or rectangles to one another. So a rhombus is defined as having 2 pairs of parallel sides. So like a rectangle and a square, they do still have 2 pairs of parallel sides. So 1 pair here and 1 pair here on this shape, 1 pair here and 1 pair here on this shape, 1 pair here, and 1 pair here on this shape. They're all made up of 2 pairs of parallel lines. But the difference is that 4 sides are of equal length. So just like a square, they're special because their side lengths are always going to be equal. So if I told you that this is 3 feet, that means that every side is 3 feet. And similar here, if I told you this was 6 inches, that tells you that every side is 6 inches. So again, a square could be an example of a rhombus, but not all rhombuses are squares, because if you remember, squares have to have right angles. A rhombus doesn't have to have right angles. It can, but it doesn't have to. Here we see this parallelogram, or rhombus, has acute and obtuse angles that make it up. All right, our last big quadrilateral term for today is a trapezoid. Now, trapezoids stand out from the other three that we've learned because they only have one pair of parallel sides. So if you look at these examples of a trapezoid, you'll see that there is a parallel side here, but that these sides would eventually meet or intersect. And if you look at this example of a trapezoid over here, you'll see that these two sides are parallel, but if the other two sides continued, they would eventually intersect. They don't run across the same distance apart. So trapezoids stand out because they have only one pair of parallel sides. Rhombuses, squares, and rectangles all have two pairs, but trapezoids only have one. And the sides can be equal, but they don't have to be. And you'll see a lot of different kinds of angles in these shapes. You'll see right angles, you'll see acute, and you'll see obtuse angles. So the biggest, easiest way to tell if something is a trapezoid is to count those parallel sides. All right, Gators, let's look at some practice questions. Now is a great time to pull out a scrap piece of paper and work along with me, or pull out your book and work through these problems on your own or at your own pace. So they're going to show you some different quadrilaterals today, and they're going to ask you to circle which terms apply, kind of like we did when we were looking at what makes a polygon. So if we look at this first shape, let's ask ourselves first, how many pairs of parallel lines are there? Well, there's one set here, or one pair here, that run parallel, and there's one set here that run parallel. So already I know that there are two sets of parallel lines, and I'm just going to draw some parallel lines as a little note. So already they're asking me, is it a rectangle, a rhombus, a square, or a trapezoid? Well, I know it's not a trapezoid because trapezoids only have one set of parallel lines, and I've already found that this has two. Now, I can get rid of square and rhombus by asking myself, do those sides look equal? Well, it looks to me like this side, let's call it A, matches this side, let's call it B, and it looks like C would match D, but these sides that run perpendicular to each other, they don't match. There's a longer side at the base than there is at the width. So that tells me it's not a square and it's not a rhombus because the sides aren't all four equal. So that leaves us with a rectangle. And our first shape is called a rectangle, or a quadrilateral, or a polygon. All right, let's look at our next quadrilateral. So here I can see, again, I'm going to start with my parallel lines. I can see I have one set of parallel lines running this way, and one set or pair of parallel lines running this way. So again, I have two sets of parallel lines. All right, because I have two sets, I know once again that it's not a trapezoid, but that's not what they're asking me this time. They're asking me, is it a rhombus, is it a quadrilateral, is it a square, or is it a rectangle? Well, I know it's a quadrilateral because I can count that there are four sides. Now I have to eliminate some of these other terms. Now, squares and rectangles have these nice square 90-degree angles. So let's look here at this angle. Is that a perfect L-shaped angle or a 90-degree angle? It's not, right? It's an acute angle. So that tells me that it's not a square and it's not a rectangle. So what makes a rhombus special? Well, a rhombus doesn't need to have right angles like a square does, but it still has four equal sides. So let's look. Looking at this shape, do these four sides look about equal? They do, right? So this would be a quadrilateral, and we could probably call it safely a rhombus, excuse me. All right, last shape. So we have our terms. It can be a rectangle, a rhombus, a trapezoid, or a quadrilateral. Well, quadrilateral is the easiest one to check. Let's count the sides. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a quadrilateral. All right. Next, let's take a look at how many parallel pairs of lines make up this shape. So I can see that here I have a set of parallel lines. But if I look at these two lines, they would eventually intersect to make some intersecting lines. So this only has one set of parallel lines, which means that it can't be a rectangle and it can't be a rhombus, because both rectangles and rhombi, or many rhombus, would have two pairs of parallel lines. So that leaves us with a trapezoid. Remember, trapezoids have only one set of parallel lines, and they can have different side lengths and different types of angles. So this is a quadrilateral called a trapezoid. All right, Gators, I'll see you in our next lesson. Good luck. Bye.